This is FX Medicine. I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. I'm here talking with Reece Cohen. Now, Reece, you're with Can10.
Yes.
And your big platform is education.
Right.
This has undoubtedly been the whole foundation of what needs to happen. What do we need to do and why?
Gee, that's a big question. Well,
10 hours.
10 hours. Okay, I'll start now. We have heard a lot over this weekend, and obviously, in the last few months, about how important it is for doctors and clinicians to be educated on cannabis. But we also need to consider, in my opinion, the wider community as well. Not to mention all of the research scientists and entrepreneurs and technology advocates that are working in and around this space, or who really want to get involved in the cannabis industry and want to contribute to making this medicine available to patients. In Israel, Can10 is from Israel originally. They've been running a program out of the Technion University for a couple of years now, where Professor Meshulam and Eddie Meiri are some of the contributors. And most of the people that come through that training program are looking to innovate the way that we research cannabis and manufacture and make accessible medicines. And we are recreating that in Australia with Australian-specific content for people that access that knowledge as well.
Okay, so one of the I guess, conundrums that Didi, I really need to speak to that man and clear it up in my head. One of the conundrums that he threw up was basically the personalisation that one is needed, particularly in the example he gave with autistic kids.
Right.
And yet this herb has been used for thousands of years, reasonably treating not just in a cultural way, but also in medicinal use. So I also take the point that for a clinician, for a GP, a specialist, to be able to offer some solace for an intractable condition, one must eventually make a choice to treat.
Right.
Associate Professor David Caldecott brought up the very salient point of gabapentin, that you actually have this sort of trial and error, try there and do that and titrate things and see where you go. What do we need to do with regards to dosing and indeed with education of dosing?
Yeah. Well, I think it's probably a bit different in the Israeli context maybe, and definitely from the North American context. The particular way in which the Australian regulations around cannabis medicines are going to work means that kind of dosage and titration guidance is going to primarily come from the providers of these medicines. And I think these companies that are going to be manufacturing, that are already importing but are going to be manufacturing cannabis medicines in Australia, recognise the need for quite a diversity of products to be available to patients. And I'd like to see, I'm no pharmacist myself, but I think compounding pharmacists will end up having a really big role to play in this field in years to come, because that's somewhere where you can more easily slightly alter the combination of chemicals in the medicine that you're prescribing. But I think really the leadership needs to come, and we are seeing it come from these companies that are in Australia. It's their responsibility to make sure that their medicines are safe and effective, and that doctors know how to use them properly. So I'm keen to work with them to get that education across as well. The more the merrier. Yeah.
Dearth of education so far in Australia. 22 states in the US have now legalised cannabis in some fashion.
Right.
I shouldn't say legalised.
Right. Yeah. So
what's the word?
Well, back in the day when I first got into cannabis, I was actually doing a political economy thesis on US cannabis markets, and I chose not to use the word legalization. I chose to use the word re-regulation. But that's my own academic term.
Well, let's talk about appropriately legislated for patient use, patient access. What's the education situation for any GP, not just the promoters, not just the people that are for cannabis use, but let's say for a GP or a specialist that is against cannabis and wants to learn more about cannabis so that they know their duty of care is fulfilled. What's the situation of education in America or indeed Israel?
Pretty poor, I think, generally. There are more training programs coming out of the States now that are specifically focused at clinicians and that do qualify for the kind of accredited points that doctors require to participate in these training programs. I'm in touch with a few people over there who are running those kinds of programs, and also in Canada, I think it's probably more well established, more institutionalized, that kind of training.
Portugal? Spain?
Not so much to my knowledge.
No?
I mean, in neither of those countries do we have legalized medicinal cannabis. Portugal, we have decriminalized drug use. And in Spain, I think it's a bit of an ambiguous sort of grey situation where you have a whole combination of patient groups and what's the word I'm looking for? Clubs, cannabis clubs that operate in a grey area to do with the differentiation between personal and commercial use of cannabis.
Right.
But what's really exciting is the movements we're seeing in Germany, the real legalization of medicinal cannabis at a national level.
Right.
I mean, they're going to be looking to Australia for a lot of their regulatory recommendations, I think. And with their much larger population, their much larger manufacturing base, they've got much more capital
They're famous
to
for
put to work.
the phytopharmaceutical sort of
Exactly, yeah. I think we'll end up seeing in years to come a lot of really exciting education and research and product development coming out of Germany. But Australia is still leading the world. I mean, we're one of the few countries in the world that has a legal national medical cannabis scheme, and it's easily the most well-respected and rigorous. So, yeah.
So about education costs. There's an education platform that's free, and there's this disdain for people making money out of education.
Right.
And I can understand that. I can also, though, understand the other side without taking it to the extent of being mercenary, but I can understand that there are reasonable costs involved in producing an educational platform.
Sure.
How do you wend your way? How do you row the boat along that very windy stream of mercenaryism versus putting out something appropriate from a commercial basis, but without, let's say, leaning towards product training rather than true education?
Right, well, that's a really important question. So I wouldn't necessarily use the word mercenaryism. I mean, Australia is a really huge provider of education, especially to Asia and Southeast Asia. It's one of our main exports is training.
Yep.
And it does really awesome things for the Australian economy. It employs many thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in Australia, and it's a really fantastic and dynamic industry. So I wouldn't call it mercenary to have a commercial. In terms of making education available at an appropriate price, I think really for doctors it's less about the price and more about the content. From my personal experience, if doctors know that this is an appropriate training program that's going to give them really clear guidance, and it is accredited, and they can put that cost back on their hospital to ensure that they're properly trained to do their work, that would be an excellent outcome. And that's something I'm keen to work towards. But this is also a really exciting industry to work in, and not just in Australia, but around the world. And I know many people who are really passionate to get access to skills and knowledge, and are more than happy to pay tuition for an education program, much like they would do to do a Cert 4 course or an undergrad course.
So one of the issues of accreditation is that a product can't be mentioned, obviously.
Yeah.
So is that the protective mechanism that we have and need, so that doctors, any medical professional doesn't get, I'm going to use the strong word, brainwashed into saying that one is the one that I use because it's the quote-unquote best?
It's really interesting, actually. The situation of cannabis medicines in Australia at the moment is unique. Not unique, but quite interesting. So there are unregistered medicines, and there are specific prohibitions around advertising for unregistered medicines specifically. That's why I think providing, and this is something we're looking to do down the track, providing a non-partisan education program to do with cannabis medicines generally, that doesn't privilege particular groups necessarily, but does provide doctors with both the education they need and also the accreditation they require to demonstrate that they're a specialist sufficient to tick off a SASCAT-B or SASCAT-A application.
Like somebody that's had appropriate training in skin cancer diagnosis as opposed to a cowboy. And we have seen those, so don't deny the medical profession.
But I think that particular regulatory hurdle around advertising unregistered medicines is going to uniquely protect the cannabis industry from turning too quickly into the sort of thing we see in the pharmaceutical industry, which is excellent. I mean, it's an accident of the regulation, but I think it'll end up actually being quite good.
So when you say end up being quite good, what's your crystal ball gazing? How long?
That's a tough one. So look, we're probably a good 5 years away from getting an ARTG listed cannabis medicine in Australia, which is really where I think a lot of people would like to get to.
Yep.
In the meantime, there's immense work to be done on patient access issues that really need to be addressed. And part of that will be solved through education. A lot of that
catch-22 here.
A lot of that will need to be solved through lobbying.
Right.
And comprehensive concerted lobbying efforts through organisations like the Medical Cannabis Council that's now established, and I'm a proud founding member. Hopefully we'll be able to coordinate and make more effective the lobbying efforts that need to be made at the legislative level.
I got to say that in the interim of this sort of thing happening down the line, as you say, to stop us going around in a catch-22 situation, we really need every single GP who is interested in patient health. How about I tar that brush? If you have any interest in patient health and any interest in duty of care, then you must be supporting United in Compassion and learning about medicinal cannabis, regardless of whether you want to or not. You need to know about that drug.
I agree. Yeah, completely. So United in Compassion is a wonderful organisation that all GPs should join. There are also other really excellent groups that are doing education in the space, like David Caldecott, an incredible advocate for doctor education.
Absolutely.
Also Medical Cannabis Research Australia. I was lucky enough to travel around Australia with those guys back in May, and we delivered workshops, seminars to health professionals in basically every single city, in major city in Australia. But there's only so much work you can do. There's only so much time people have, and I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not qualified to educate doctors myself. What I'm keen to do is to put pieces together and bring the right people to the right place at the right time so we can get the work done.
Reece, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Nice to
This is FX Medicine, and I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. Thanks, mate.
Ta.